But would U.S. forces defend the island?
Yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack.
So unlike Ukraine, to be clear, sir, U.S. forces, U.S. men and women, would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion?
Yes.
Whether the White House wants to say it or not, that was a major change in U.S. policy, or at least articulating U.S. policy. American men and women will defend Taiwan from the Chinese. I want to head over to the maps to show you what that really means in terms of American lives and firepower. The Taiwan Strait is right here, China, Taiwan there. The Chinese sort of showed us their war plan, right? They were going to cut off all of Taiwan from the sea. This is basically what they did right after Nancy Pelosi's visit. Now the U.S. Options here. You've got down here near Indonesia, a bunch of U.S. ships in the South China Sea. You've got U.S. ships in Australia, U.S. Warplanes in Australia as well. Obviously, a lot of bases and forces in Hawaii, and then a large U.S. presence in Japan. Diego Garcia is there, a bunch of B-52s. Between aircraft carriers, planes, bombers, C-17s, of course, anything on the sea as well, we could easily lose more Americans in a 4-day war with China than Iraq and Afghanistan combined. Much of the war, if it happens, will be in the air. Former Supreme Allied Commander, Europe, Air Force General Philip Breedlove is with us now. General, it's good to see you, sir. I have to imagine that there were a lot of folks in the Pentagon all of a sudden last night who sat up pretty straight when they heard that.
Yes, clearly this was a bit of a surprise. And as you've already mentioned once tonight, it looks like the White House has already walked back those remarks and said there has been no major change to our policy. So we'll see how this plays out now as the president goes forward.
Yeah, but can we really say that he said this at least 3 times clearly every time the White House walks back? He's the president of the United States. He is the commander-in-chief. What's the word game everybody's playing here?
Well, I think that it's been said before a couple of times that, you know, when these things happen, it may be revealing what's actually on the president's mind. And so to what degree he just sent a message to China and others like Iran and Russia and others, you know, what was the message? But this is clearly different to him than fighting in Ukraine.
Estimated U.S. losses for defending Taiwan: 900 American fighter and attack aircraft lost in 4 weeks, half of the U.S. Air Force and Navy's combat planes. Obviously, that doesn't count military transports if they had to fly into Taiwan to deliver supplies, aircraft carriers, which we know the Chinese have carrier killer missiles that they have designed and tested in their deserts. And the like. Do the American people really understand what a force-on-force China versus the United States war with Taiwan would look like?
No, I don't think that there's a good understanding of what it would look like. And Leland, all those things you said are well-founded, and they come from people that are very smart. And there's a clear difference than the parallel I'm about to draw. But if you remember Desert Storm 1, everybody talking about this is the most massive firepower that America's had to fight through, and how the intricate defensive plans of Iraq were there, and how many airplanes we were going to lose. And it turned out quite different. So it's never as good or as bad as you read. Clearly, you're stating it well. This is going to be a fight that will have losses, but it's probably not exactly as bad as some have laid it out.
In fairness, you make a great point that it's never, the extremes go one way or the other. We all thought Iraq and Afghanistan was going to be a cakewalk, and obviously it turned out not to be, and we learned some difficult lessons there. I see you nodding. I'm thinking about your old neck of the woods of Russia and how this plays into it. A lot of reporting now that the sanctions against Vladimir Putin are just not doing what we thought they would do. They're doing what we thought they would do to us, which is massive inflation, but not to Vladimir Putin. How is China seeing this and relating it back to what they might do with Taiwan?
Well, it's a very interesting thing. And you remember, you and I talked maybe months ago now that, you know, sanctions have never changed Mr. Putin's behavior. They have certainly affected Russia, the people of Russia, the economy of Russia, the future of Russia, but sanctions have never changed Mr. Putin's actions, and we'll see if that's going to be here. But the point that you bring up is very important. So what is happening is the sanctions are crippling Russia. And, you know, China already is having some monetary issues and valuation issues and what they have tied up in their properties and so forth. And so now I think that what China is looking at is what these sanctions are doing to Russia and how much they would not like that to happen to them. So even though the sanctions haven't changed Putin's positions, I think China is taking notice.
All right. General, we appreciate it. Safe travels overseas. We'll talk when you get back. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.
Yes, sir. Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.